So, Obioma, thank you so much for joining us to talk about your new book, The Problem with My Normal Penis. It's a cracking title. Can you start by telling me how the title materialised, why you picked that?
Yeah, I think weirdly when the book came to me, that was the first thing that came to me, was this idea of, with masculinity and with our ideas about what masculinity is, if you exist sometimes on the end of that spectrum, so be that as a black man who is in society hypersexualized, or even as a sort of, as an Asian man who, again, as a part of that same spectrum, is sort of undersexualized and seen as somehow, asexual and not a sexual threat, that actually this idea of what normal isn't as neutral as I think we think it is. And it's really interesting because I think lots of people sort of see the title and get a bit scared. It's got the word penis in it. And it's been really interesting, actually. There are some radio shows and TV shows that are just like, oh, actually, we love the book, really enjoyed it. Can't talk about it, though, because it's got the word penis in it. And I think, actually, that's a large issue with not only the book that the book tries to discuss, but also sort of in a wider sense, more societally, we don't want to discuss male sexuality. We're okay talking about vaginas and the anatomical nature of that and discussing sort of female reproductive rights, or, the fact that there are women who are sexually assaulted and harassed. But we never discuss who's doing the harassing and where that problem and issue originates from. We have a tendency sometimes to recognize that there are these people who sort of exist on the extremes of society who are the sort of sexual assailants and harassers, and they're terrible people, and let's sort of string up Harvey Weinstein and how did that happen? But of course those are the extremes, and that actually the thing that takes more work is actually interrogating the low levels of misogyny and narratives that a lot of men and women have internalized, and how can we begin to unpick that? And
you talk about the story that in some way formed the title in the book. So can you explain a bit how kind of your blackness has unwantedly changed your sex life?
Yeah, I think, and I don't know if I need to, I don't know what words I can sort of say here, but I have been mid-coitus with people who, in the middle of sex, have said the N-word and felt very comfortable sort of using that. And I, weirdly as well, I think because I have spent the majority of my life in England, we don't really use the N-word here in the same way. So sort of hearing it in a British accent is always a bit sort of jarring anyway. But when I did hear it, and I realised actually hearing that mid-sex and realising that is how somebody was viewing me, meant that in this thing that is as intimate as two people can get, there was actually a sort of rather large gap between us where we weren't connecting in the way that I thought we were. I existed as an idea, as a sort of hypersexualized version of myself that has a lot of baggage that's sort of attached to it with what it is to be a black man or an N-word. Dick. And so having that was complicated because there's this odd sense of, I don't want to say betrayal, that's the wrong word, but up until this point, I thought, oh, this is someone who I can feel quite close with, safe with, and want to feel intimate with. And then once that fissure was acknowledged, I had to, just to keep myself safe, sort of remove myself from that situation. And so I think, if we're talking about normal and what normal is, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, on a conscious or subconscious level, we are taught what is acceptable.
You write in the book about kind of what you're shown as a hero as a kid. And a lot of that kind of plays into the masculinity as you grow up. So explain a little bit what you saw as a hero when you were growing up.
I remember watching Rocky, and there's a scene in like the first Rocky where Adrian, he's with her for the first time alone in her flat, or in his flat, and she's like, yeah, I'm gonna bounce, and he's like, yeah, no, don't. And she's about to leave. She's got a hand on the door, and he closes it and has got her cornered and kisses her. And then eventually she gives in, and we sort of go, yeah, that was great. Yeah, Rocky, whoa, he won the day. He went 12 rounds with Apollo Creed. And you think, I don't know how much she was consenting to that. And I think what's tricky is that if you're growing up with those narratives of pursuer and pursued, that sex is something that is given up, then as a teenager, and it's constantly low level, okay, well, you just sort of wear her down, grind her down, all of that nonsense. That if you're having that disconnect, where is the moment where you get to, 18, you're at university, you've got your own accommodation for the first time, you're drinking for the first time, and you're with a girl? Like, what's to stop young men who've grown up on these narratives repeating the same thing as Rocky that they've seen in these films, and he's been glorified, and then thinking, oh yeah, no, but that for you, now you are violating consent. Like, you've done it wrong. But it's like, but you said that guy was okay, and the story that I saw was that she gave into it and that it was acceptable. And so if you're not having this conversation with teenagers, it's not as if they sort of magically get to 18 and go, oh, right, I understand consent. No, you have to have had it before then. And in the narratives that we're putting out, we need to be able to have challenging conversations where we say, actually, no, it is sort of all the more rewarding if there is sort of enthusiastic consent, and if both parties are saying, yeah, I'm really into this. And that can only work if you're saying to men that your value isn't just in your sexuality, that actually you're allowed to be your full self.
And so you also write in the book about how the level of the lack of privilege that being a black man in Britain brings, and realising that, but also about the the being what you can't see, so the lack of black men in power in Britain, and the stats about how far through education black men might get. So how do you think that affects how black boys now are growing up in Britain and where they see places for themselves?
Yeah, race and class very much intersect. And so if we're talking about how much social mobility we have and where that journey goes, how are we, if we are committed to that, if we are committed to an egalitarian society where everyone should have the same options, well, then we need to make sure that not only on a race level, but as I say, these things aren't just silos. On a class level, how are we making sure that, a rising tide lifts all boats? There was an after-school drama club that I went to that Daniel Kaluuya went to. And he's been Oscar nominated twice, won one for Judas and the Black Messiah. And I look at that and I go, yeah, but that was only possible because we went to an after-school thing that for £4 you could, for an hour and a half, do some drama and improvisation games. Now, I'm not saying that all of us are going to go on to win Oscars, but Dan comes from working class roots. So you only get that if you've watered it now. And what's tricky is that that doesn't play particularly well. Like Stop and Search, yeah, I'm hard on crime, bosh. Or like, I'm gonna clamp down on this. You don't see the results of it for another 10, 15 years. But then when you do, as we are seeing now, when you've cut down on all those community centres, and we go, I just don't understand. How has this happened that, there's rising knife crime and, that all these people are just hanging out on the street? Ma'am, you're being disingenuous. And like, we all know that you're being disingenuous, but politically it plays very well to say, oh, we're going to put a bunch of, coppers on the streets, or we're going to be hard on this and we're going to expel people who do that. And you think it just doesn't work. And because these things like race and class do intersect, having the ability to have a well-funded school and with people who can hold the space of, because I'm not so stressed, I can look after you and say, listen, how are we going to get you into Oxford? How are we going to get you into Cambridge? Or how are we going to get you into politics? That only works if you've got the space to do it. And if you're so worried about, actually, I'm not getting paid enough and I'm too stressed, I need to go home. We as a society know the value of things like the arts. And we know that because in those private schools where 7% of the population go to, but we end up with 41% of the BAFTA winners from, that 50% of the admissions to Oxbridge come from private schools. Well, those private schools very much don't cut back on the arts. They hire old RSC actors to come and be their heads of drama, as they did at Eton. Well, you know that because you know that then you end up with the Tom Hiddlestons of the world. So you go, why is it actually that those things that are important are cut back on? Who do you want to be telling that story? Do we want to live in an egalitarian society where you can end up with a Tom Hiddleston and a Daniel Kaluuya? And if so, well, what are we doing to pass that ladder back down and to sort of keep watering those seeds? Because at the moment, I don't know if we're doing enough.
And what effect has it had on you in the acting industry, the kind of the narrative around kind of like diversity casting? How do you see that and how has that impacted you?
Yeah, it's it's funny. I was doing a show about a month ago. Gosh, this is the first time I've actually spoken about it out loud. And I overheard these 4 people who had just left the show, and they were talking about my casting and called it woke silliness. Because I was playing a character. This is in Frozen the musical. I was playing a character who isn't, I don't look like a blonde Norwegian. Fine. Who was played by Jonathan Groff in the sort of animated film. But it was, and I was I don't think they were expecting me to be out of the theatre as quickly as I was, but I overheard them calling me a darkie, and I just thought, it's really sad. It's really sad because I don't think the majority of those 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds who were in there, who were watching, thought about that for longer than 2 seconds. They saw me with a reindeer and went, oh, that's Crystal because he's got the reindeer with him. That was it. And in a world where you have a princess or a queen who can turn a whole country to ice, you have a talking snowman, having an Irish Nigerian playing your Disney love interest was too much for you. That was woke. That was woke culture silliness. Okay, fine. I'm sorry for you because you don't, you literally won't suspend your disbelief. You don't know how to. And that must be limiting for you. So, yeah, I mean, it exists. I think we're making progress. I would like to think that Disney are sort of wonderful in that sense and are really trying and are leading the way. But also, I think what's tricky is that there are still those people who, again, because we live in a society, because we're still rubbing shoulders with, people whose opinions won't shift overnight. I have actor friends who go, "Oh no, they went for the diversity casting." That's what my agent said. And you go, "Oh, okay." So it's not that the other person was better than you or good. It was that they were diverse. Okay. And that's complicated because obviously these are people who you work alongside, colleagues, friends, but their opinions aren't going to change overnight. And so how do we give ourselves grace? And how do we give those people a safe space to sort of grow from, but also not tolerate the hurt that it causes? And I think that's always a fine line. It's always a fine balance because I want you to do the learning. I want you to change and for your ideas to shift. I don't know if I always will have the capacity to sort of hold your hand through that. So it's why it's incumbent on all of us to sort of have those conversations and to sort of challenge and call each other out, because otherwise you're putting the very people who are most at risk and at most sort of feeling the consequences of whatever sort of discrimination or prejudice to be the ones to sort of shift people's minds. I'm hopeful.
Well, thank you so much. The book is a great listen. I'm sure a great read as well. I personally listened, but and thanks so much for chatting to me.
Thank you.